everybody. This used to be Neville Spiritual on Sunday night, and this was in German. Turns out that I've maybe overdone it a little bit. As it happens, a lot of the stuff that I told my fellow citizens here is stuff that is very much well known in the English-speaking space, especially in the spiritual space, and Sadhguru, when he was in Cologne, got a little bit frustrated that people didn't really understand what he was talking about because they didn't have the background in the culture and also didn't understand English and it wasn't translated. So I thought I'll, give a little bit of background to the whole thing, and I didn't really think all that much about it because it's something that I've been exposed to for 10 years probably now. But as it turns out, nobody here has been. So, and as it happens, I just dumped a whole load of them on them. All the stuff that I've learned in the last few years, I just dumped on them in a few weeks and expected that it would just be accepted because everybody else around me accepted it and knew it to be true. And turns out that they don't. It was stuff that hasn't been taught here. A lot of it is theosophy that came over from India, I believe, to England 200 years ago and has found its way in most of the spiritual teachings, but it wasn't taught in Germany because it was abused during the Third Reich, because some of these advanced teachings can be abused, and we all know that it has been abused in other countries as well. There was, maybe still is, quite a big movement in England as well, and maybe in other countries. So it wasn't taught at all here, and a lot of people have never heard about it. So when I came along with it, they thought that I was totally crazy. So I'm giving this a little bit of a rest and instead go on to just talking about stuff that comes to mind on Saturday or Sunday when I feel that it may be of relevance. And this is going to be in English, so those who are German and still want to listen to it, they are absolutely welcome. On YouTube you can also turn on the subtitles, and I've explained several times how, but it will be in English. And if you take something from it, take something from it. If you think it's all BS, that's fine too. I don't assume that this is going to be super relevant to everybody every time, but I just wanted to explain some of my experiences. Some will come out of the spiritual space, some will come out of the personal development space, some will be building on what my teachers have taught me. Tony Robbins is one of them, Master Ko is another one of them, Sadhguru is one of them, and it will build on that. I will not necessarily use their material by itself, but just how I implemented it, or it can be out of some other thing. Today it is out of the Bible, the Joseph story, because I just heard that. Turns out that there was a Crystival festival in 1984, and I went there with my friends, and yes, that's how old I am. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I ever had. And there was this musical. It is, I thought it was the translation of Joseph the Technicolor Dreamcoat, but it's actually not. I've listened to both of them. It is different. It is the Joseph story out of the Bible, but there are some really beautiful songs in there which I listened to. And one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of the songs that I used to listen to as a child or as a teenager or even in my 20s that I kept repeating over and over again, that were my favorite songs, ended up being my life story. So be careful what you hypnotize yourself with, especially if you have a penchant for drama. That may actually be what you will be living later. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck with it or that it actually turns out to be the same as the song. But this was also one of the stories that I really gravitated to and that I still remember now after 40 years almost, and almost I still almost have it memorized. And one of the interesting things is, if you listen to something that you listened over and over again and you think you got the lesson out of it, sometimes when you've lived it, you realize that somehow it didn't work out for you that way. You know, you didn't get the happy end that was advertised at the end of the story. You went through the whole story, but then it wasn't the happy end, and you think, why on earth wasn't it the happy end now? It was supposed to come here. You know, I went through the whole all the shit before. Why can't I now get to the happy end? And turns out that sometimes there's just this little one sentence in there that shows you that it wasn't quite as easy and that there is a step in between. But since it was just one sentence, you kind of missed it, and it was so far in the future that you missed it. And the sentence that I'm thinking of, which might be one that is frustrating a lot of you as well nowadays, especially if you're in the win-win space, if you are an environmentalist or somebody who really cares about nature and sees all the reversal and all the, you know, especially in Germany, there's this Stiftung Familienunternehmen or something like that, which is now all against environmental laws and, you know, what's happening in America and stuff. So sometimes you wonder, how did this happen? You know, we went through all of this, we went through all the pain, we went through all the progress, and finally something was happening, and now it's not, right? And for me, it was a weird thing, because I left Germany, I think, like 25 years ago. And there was a reason for it. There was a reason for it because I didn't feel that I was being taken serious. I mean, there was another reason for it as well, but one of them was that I wasn't taken serious here, no matter what I said in a way. But when I went to America, or when I went to England, what I said was taken seriously. In America especially, it wasn't just that they listened to me and thought, yeah, you're right, and yeah, of course this is, and yes, you can do this, but then they expected me to be able to do much more than that. And it was an explosion of growth for me, because suddenly people were not putting me down and expecting less of me and always trying to put the lid on me, but they actually expected more of me than I expected of myself, or I even thought I could do. And suddenly I could do things that I had never been able to do before, within literally months. It was incredible how much this hypnotization of the environment is affecting you without you even realizing it. I mean, one stupid example is singing on stage, for example. I had years and years of singing lessons, opera singing lessons, and every time I went on stage, I was so uncomfortable and my voice would break, especially if I had to go into a higher voice. And I didn't really want to be on stage. I moved to America, and people expected me to be able to do this, and this is what I wanted to be an actress, but they were only musicals. So I had to actually sing in those musicals, and after 2 months I could sing on stage. And I could sing in the head voice, and I could, you know, get through the transition without a problem, and my voice never broke. And that hadn't happened for years before. Now suddenly it worked. And I couldn't explain to myself why. And then I realized it is a different kind of expectation. It was like a certain barrier was broken open. And other things happened, of course, as well. You know, you build on success. And so I had one thing after the other happen, and one thing after the other, and I always had to grow more. And initially, the growth is really explosive because you've been pushed down so long that you've got so much energy to build with. So, and that energy then suddenly explodes. But if you challenged, at some point you're kind of running out of that energy. You think, well, my God, I have to, you know, another thing. And you run out of energy in a way, and then you have to kind of step back a little bit and refuel, because it's like breathing out, breathing in, right? You can't breathe out all the time. At some point you have to breathe in again. And that was spirituality for me. And then I came back here after 25, 7 maybe years or so, and I thought, hey, I've learned so many things, and maybe I can bring them back here. It's not that the other people here haven't learned anything. Of course they've learned something that I haven't learned, very likely, but I have learned some things that they haven't learned, because it's a different culture. Every culture has its different wisdoms in a way, right? in every culture that you go into, people think that certain things are completely normal and everybody knows them. And you go to the next culture and nobody knows them. It's really weird. And if you go to a different culture and live there, and you don't just live with people that are from your culture and only mix with them, or maybe mix with some people from work, but even in your free time, you mix with people from that culture or from other cultures. And I was in London, and there was basically every culture on earth, right? And you mix with these different cultures, then you suddenly realize, oh my God, this is a completely different experience. You see it from a completely different angle suddenly, the things that you looked at before. And it's almost like meta programs in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. There's this concept of meta programs where people evaluate things from a certain standpoint, either from within or from without, or from the past, present, or future, whatever. So at each standpoint means that you see what's happening in a different way. And if you're in a different culture, suddenly you see something completely different, and you actually develop a little bit of a different personality there. Not that it's not in a sick way, but in just as you have a different personality when you speak to your children than if you speak to your spouse or to your friends, you do have a different personality when you speak in a different language, because certain ideas are not expressed in that language that were in your language before, and certain ideas that culture has aren't expressed in the culture that you're coming from. So you can't really stay the same. So I thought, hey, I'll bring some of this stuff back, because it's actually the way that Europe became Europe and became quite advanced for a while, in the last 1,000 years or something, because and I've got that from a book called Guns, Germs and Steel, which was recommended to me by a CEO of a Canadian energy provider, I think the biggest energy provider in Vancouver at the time, when I was there, 2005, 2006, something like that. And he recommended that book to me. And turns out that one of the reasons why Europe developed is that it had a very long trade route, which means all the traders, they went through all these different cultures and got exposed to all these different ideas and went on, and then people and then passed those ideas on, and then people built on those ideas, and they also passed on the technical developments, of course, and then you built on that, and everybody's building on each other. While if you're on an island state, for example, there aren't these technical developments, right? You can move from one village to the other, and you may be seeing a different pattern of knitting, maybe, but there aren't these huge big technical developments that are in different cultural centers. So if you're exposed to more of this stuff, it actually produces more growth. So I thought, hey, people are going to be really happy when I come and I tell them all this stuff. And no, they weren't happy. Instead, they told me, what do you think you are? Basically, that is, initially I didn't realize it because I was doing these podcasts and stuff, and then I had a few interesting conversations with people. So one of the things that I missed in the Joseph musical, and this is how this ties back together, is also the sentence, and he waited for a long time to see if they had changed and if their attitude to certain things had changed. And if you see that the attitude has not changed, maybe it is not the time to introduce something new. Maybe people need to come to a certain state before they are open for something new. And if you give it to them beforehand, you actually do them a disfavor, because they are not open to it, and they will put it down, and then they can't use it, and later they have such a bad opinion about what you were trying to teach them or what you're trying to pass on to them. It's not even that this stuff comes from me, right? What you're passing on to them, that they will not be able to use it because they are primed against it. They're primed negatively against it. It comes from that stupid woman who doesn't know anything and thinks she knows everything, or comes from somebody that they deem to be below them because of their gender, for example, which is, in some countries, even if it looks like it's gender parity, in pockets of it and in areas of it, it may not be at all. Like Germany, for example, women and men, women were very much the same as men, as I understand, in East Germany, where the communists were. But in West Germany, they weren't. If I go to, and that is one of the things that really shocked me when I came back, is when I went to work in one of those local firms here. It was a local startup. One of the women told me, well, all these all these women expect of themselves to be just as good as men, but of course we aren't. I thought, what? Of course we are. I mean, at school we are. I mean, we're doing, usually women have better grades than men. It's just men sell themselves better. And in England and America, where I worked, like, I worked with people in New York, I worked with people in London. Yes, women do make a little bit less money, and yes, they don't get the titles, but if they are in the room and they made it into the room, they are being respected just as much as men are. And in a lot of these groups at the highest level, at investment banks and lawyers, it is women partners who are, putting forward the documentation, who are very much listened to. The thought that we as women, we are just, weaker. Yes, of course, we are physically weaker. I mean, that is a fact, unless you've got a weak man and you've got a very well-trained woman. But spiritually or mentally, of course not. But that is what they were trained, and that is what I was trained as. And that is why I had to go to England, and that is why I had to go to America to break out of that. And that is why it was also difficult for me to come back and not fall back into that, especially when people around me keep telling me this. And of course, if you then start telling men, about win-win situations with nature and how they should be, acting in their business, or what international law is, of course they're going to look down on you, because this is not appropriate in that kind of a culture. So sometimes you have to wait until the pain is there. And the problem is also in yourself. If you start sharing too early and you start putting yourself out there, not only are you seen as totally arrogant, and none of the things that you come to share are seen as helpful or as loving or as compassionate or anything. They're just seen as arrogant and as stupid, because how do you think that you know anything better if they've never actually heard those ideas before? You also waste your energy, because I've noticed, I've done this in companies sometimes, that when change really needed to be implemented, because there were certain things that needed to be done, the regulator wanted certain things to be done, and otherwise the company would have to be fined, I would push and push and push and push and push and push locally. But usually I had somebody at the top level who would back me up. It wasn't that it was just me. There was somebody at the top level who would say, yes, this needs to be done, and then I had to push against the middle management in order to get certain things done. But if the top level isn't there and I'm not being backed up, this is not going to happen, right? So, and also, and even if people start listening, at the point when they start listening, I added in one company here, and I kept telling them certain things about their contracts, and they were English language contracts. I've been in English language countries for 25 years, while most of these people only had English at school. I'm an English qualified lawyer as much as a German qualified lawyer, so of course I know a few things, but I would just not get through. It was like there was like this blind spot there, and it got really, really frustrating for me. So I wasn't very nice maybe at times, but I really tried to get through to them. But I didn't get through to them until basically the very end, until one of the big law firms internationally told them, yeah, she's actually right. But at that point, I didn't even feel like changing anything anymore. And that is when I could have really helped. That is when I could have, if I had waited a little bit longer maybe to push, that is when I could have really made a difference. But at that point, I really thought, okay, you guys do whatever you want. And I'm still not really sure how you get there. But one thing I do think is true, that you have to wait until people are in the right state before you offer help. One thing that one of my spiritual teachers told me once when he wasn't helping me um, was that if you help someone and if you heal someone who hasn't learned the lesson yet, you take on their karma. So sometimes you may have to wait until they've learned the lesson, and sometimes they may pretend to have learned the lesson. They really didn't. They've just been manipulating you, trying to get you to do stuff. And that is one of the hardest things if it happens to people close to you. And you realize you really can't help at this point because you would do them a disservice and you would take on their karma. And that can be quite unpleasant. And it stunts your own growth as well. So sometimes you have to maybe let other people help because you're not the right person. You don't come in the right package maybe for them to hear you. And you have to go somewhere else and help somewhere else. And that's a very hard thing to do, especially if you have all of the best intentions, you really want to help. Anyway, I don't know, maybe some of you have been at that point as well. It is really about timing. It is really about when do you help whom, where they are in that journey. Do they have enough pain yet that they want to move? Or do they think that they can just go back to what they did and it's just going to work out anyway? I think on the environmental space, we may still be there, and some of the people who have lost contact to the leading group in environmental change, which happens to be in China, unfortunately, at the moment. I mean, at least they are doing it, which is beautiful. But some people think they have to go back to other technologies in order to catch up with them. And maybe it just has to become painful enough for them to see too that maybe change is necessary. I hope that it's still going to be possible to change then. At the moment it still is. I'm told by ChatGPT, and I'm given all these wonderful numbers. If they're true, ChatGPT is also programmed, right? But anyway, so this was the thought for today. So if you are frustrated, sometimes it's a matter of timing. Sometimes you just have to wait until they're really in enough pain that they are ready to listen. And until then, conserve your energy. That was it today. That was the thought for today. It's not against love. It's not against compassion. It's not against sharing what you know. It's not against wanting to help. It's just about the how, I suppose. And once I actually have figured out how to get through, I will let you know. This was Petrolomia from Novell, and I wish you a wonderful Sunday.